the working group on document 23 on the zoonotic diseases, and the strategic vision working group. Now we've found that the balance of attendees will facilitate. I'll ask the Secretariat for a few comments before we turn to document 24 on implications of COVID-19 on CITES implementation.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Just in terms of the cards, please, a kind reminder to please remember to take your cards with you after the session, during lunch breaks and after the session. Please remember to take your card with you. If you lost your card, you can approach the information booth. All cards that are found will be to the information booth. Not have a card and it's not at the information booth, note that you cannot make interventions without your card. It's very important to please make sure you have it with you, because if you do not have your card to insert it into the console, you cannot make interventions, and we will only be able to replace your card for the next session. So if you do not have your card, it hasn't been found that we can give it back to you, we can only provide you with another one for the next session. So very important to please make sure you have your card. And we would like to inform you that any information relating to working groups and where we are on the program can be accessed through the daily schedule on the CITES website. So if you open the daily schedule, you will see all the working group rooms and times that have been allocated, as well as information relating to side events, as well as where we are for Committee 1 and Committee 2 in terms of agenda items to be addressed. Then while I'm talking about working groups, just to inform you that the Gender Action Plan working group will meet on Thursday, 17 November at 12:15. And I don't have the room at the moment, but please check the daily schedule for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. So we will start with CoP19 Doc 24, and before we do, I just wanted to remind parties of some of the requests I made yesterday about keeping your interventions brief and focused. I need your cooperation to do that so we can give as many participants the floor as possible. Unfortunately, if we have long interventions, that makes it very challenging for me to do that, so I will ask for your cooperation and your consideration of your colleagues, please. So on COP19 Doc 24, implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on the implementation of the convention. This document's been prepared by the Secretariat, so I'll ask the Secretariat to introduce it. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The present document aims to summarize the actions of parties and the Secretariat in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, review the impact of the pandemic on the ability of the convention bodies to implement the convention, discuss key lessons learned, and consider possible responses to such events in the future. I will briefly highlight a few key findings and proposals as contained in the document. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted some activities of the CITES management and scientific authorities and enforcement focal points, and the full impact on international trade transactions will only be known if a comparative analysis is done. Online meetings present a valuable tool that can assist in moving intersessional work forward. Internet connectivity, however, remains a challenge for some parties, and this limits the ability of the affected parties to effectively participate in online meetings and discussions. There may be a need to review the rules of procedures of the committees, as well as the financial support provisions, to ensure they adequately participate in online and hybrid meetings, and to ensure these provisions provide for that. Draft decisions in this regard are proposed by the Secretariat. Live streaming of governing bodies meeting and scientific advisory body meetings should be provided for, and the necessary funds allocated in the trust fund to cover the costs. Hybrid meetings, defined as a combination of face-to-face meetings and online participation, should be considered in exceptional circumstances, and these circumstances should be clearly defined. The Secretariat is of the view that provision should be made for the participation of parties affected by compliance procedures discussed at Standing Committee and Animals Committee and Plants Committee meetings, who are not able to attend a face-to-face meeting and furthermore cannot be represented by the permanent missions. The Secretariat therefore proposed a draft decision directed to the Secretariat, the Standing Committee, and the Animals and Plants Committee to discuss and agree on the interpretation of exceptional circumstances. The Conference of the Parties or the Committee is invited to review the allocation of funds in the Trust Fund to make provision for live streaming of governing body and scientific advisory body meetings, tools for online and hybrid meetings if required, and allow greater financial flexibility and contingency measures to cater for unplanned situations, and adopt draft decisions contained in Annex 1 to the present document to develop guidance on a structured risk assessment approach for the Standing Committee to follow to determine the best course of action if intersessional work and meetings are affected by emerging operational issues, such as those experienced during COVID-19 pandemic and referred to in paragraph 2G of Annex 1 to Resolution Conf 18.2. Develop guidance on the exceptional circumstances under which parties' participation in a face-to-face meeting of the Standing Committee and the scientific advisory bodies will be facilitated through a hybrid meeting option, and review the rules of procedures for the committees established by the COP to consider whether adjustments are needed to permit and facilitate online and hybrid meetings and decision-making where these are required and agreed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I'd like to open the floor to parties to comment on document 24. I see Japan has asked for the floor. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for preparing this detailed document to Secretariat. We support the idea of holding, online meeting and hybrid meeting. And I have one favor and question about the Annex 2 of CoP19 Doc 24. There are written indicative cost for activities. For example, for activity live streaming, it costs $12,000 per meeting, and for activity online and hybrid meetings, it costs $10,000 per meetings. Could you give me a little bit more detailed information about this cost?
Thank you, Japan. Note your interest in getting some more information. I might just give a few more parties the floor, and then if the Secretariat would like to make another comment, we can come back around. I see the United States of America.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also to the Secretariat for continuing CITES meetings despite immense challenges over the past 2 years. Before our remarks, we would like to acknowledge the deeply felt and irreplaceable loss of life due to COVID-19. We further acknowledge the tremendous efforts of CITES authorities around the world and the many people in this room who overcame obstacles seen and unseen to continue implementing CITES for the benefit of wildlife and people. On this proposal, the United States supports the draft decisions with a few suggested amendments. We also have some questions regarding the budget with regard to recommendation A, and we wanted to ensure that this is being referred to discussions in the budget working group here at the COP. In addition, briefly, there are different considerations, of course, for online versus hybrid meetings, and both should be explored in the Secretariat's documents. We also remind that the Standing Committee at their 73rd meeting discussed the need for transparency and equal access for parties and observers to CITES meetings, and therefore hybrid meetings were not preferred and should only occur in exceptional circumstances. Considering those points, we make a few text edits to the draft decisions. These are relatively minor. For decision 19.AA, paragraph B, where the text reads understanding of, we suggest replacing this with recommendations for. Also, there are 3 places in the decisions where the text refers to hybrid options. That is in decision 19.AA, paragraph B, 19.BB, paragraph A, little I, and 19.CC, paragraph B. In those instances, we suggest replacing the text under which a hybrid option will be made available. We suggest replacing that with under which it may be appropriate to hold an online meeting or make hybrid options available. Lastly, in decision 19.CC, we suggest that the Standing Committee be asked to complete this work by Standing Committee 78. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. I see the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everyone. The EU and its member states would like to thank the CITES Secretariat for preparing this document and for conducting the survey. We support the decisions proposed by the Secretariat to develop relevant guidance document and review the rules of procedure of the committees to ensure that CITES meetings and intersessional work can take place also when faced with exceptional operational issues, such as those experienced during the COVID pandemic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I see Colombia, and then Canada, and then Cuba.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, y a la Secretaría por la preparación de este documento. Estamos de acuerdo con las propuestas planteadas. Resulta fundamental la implementación de mecanismos que permitan la realización de reuniones virtuales o híbridas cuando las situaciones imprevistas como una pandemia así lo exijan. Asimismo, sugerimos revisar la oportunidad de mantener la transmisión en vivo de las reuniones para promover una mayor inclusión de quienes no se encuentran en capacidad de asistir de manera presencial. También nos unimos a la solicitud de Japón y Estados Unidos sobre conocer más detalles del presupuesto y estaríamos de acuerdo con los ajustes propuestos por Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Colombia. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Canada appreciates very much this document prepared by the Secretariat and agrees with the decisions proposed. With regards to the decisions, we also do agree with the United States on putting reference to both online and hybrid option meetings and considering criteria for both. We take note that the financial issues should be taken up in the discussion on budget. Canada just had one question to the Secretariat regarding Decision 19BB, subparagraph B, where the Animals and Plants Committee are directed to propose amendments to Resolution Conf 18.2 on the establishment of committees. And it was just a question as to the intent of this and its particular relation to the Animals and Plants Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada, and Cuba. You have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidenta. Y también queremos agradecer a la Secretaría la elaboración de este documento. Nuestro país manifiesta la importancia de que las reuniones en línea se realicen solo cuando no exista otra alternativa y, por lo tanto, resulta importante tener definido un mecanismo para estos casos. También manifiesta que cuando se requiera la realización de reuniones en línea, se utilicen plataformas que estén accesibles a todas las partes, recordando que habemos partes que tenemos limitaciones por medidas de otros estados de acceder a determinadas plataformas online. Y como también se planteó, reconocer también las dificultades de conectividad que tenemos algunos países para acceder a este tipo de reuniones online. Nuestra delegación apoya las recomendaciones de la Secretaría y el Comité Permanente. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I have Senegal requesting the floor. So Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Le Sénégal, comme les autres pays, s'associe au document qui a été préparé par le secrétariat, tout en tenant compte de certains aspects soulevés par les États-Unis et nos prédécesseurs. Parce que nous avons vécu de 2020 à 2021, nous avons beaucoup fait d'efforts avec la présidente du comité permanent. Beaucoup de réunions ont été tenues en ligne, mais il y a parfois des aléas. Bon, ça dépend du pays, l'heure, la possibilité d'avoir un bon signal pour l'Internet et parfois aussi des coupures de la disponibilité de l'électricité. Si bien que le Sénégal dit que c'est bon, ça doit être l'exception, mais pas le principe. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. Do you need some time? Shall I take some observers? So I will ask the Secretariat to respond to some of the questions and comments that we've had before we continue with the rest of our discussion.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the interventions by the parties and the issues raised. In terms of the cost estimate, just to indicate that it's a tentative budget and cost estimate. In terms of live streaming of the meetings, I think everyone knows that it's week-long meetings. For live streaming, we make use of the Secretariat's YouTube channels to reduce costs. But the live streaming comes with various other requirements in terms of lighting, camera setups, etc. So the cost relating to that is about the audiovisual requirements to have clear live streaming feed to the channels that we then use. In terms of online and hybrid meetings, just to take note that if we have an online meeting, there's costs for the platforms that we must use to facilitate the online meetings. And we have quite good estimates from that based on our experience over the last few years, the couple of meetings that we had. We had good estimates in terms of the cost, in terms of having full online meetings. And if we have hybrid options, the issue is that you need to cover the cost for the platform, whether you have 10 participants or 20 participants or 100 participants. The UN does have global systems contracts that allow us to use specific platforms. So we note the comments relating to access to these platforms, and so we have the cost estimates from those. So I hope that addressed some of the issues relating to cost, and we can work on a further breakdown if that's required by the budget working group, as indicated. In terms of 19BB small b, in 19BBA2, we asked the Animals and Plants Committee to consider whether there are adjustments needed in terms of the rules of procedure. So we thought it is then essential to also look whether there are any changes needed in terms of 18.2 that provides for the terms of reference of the committees and makes the provisions in terms of how they establish their rules of procedure. So that is in case there are anything coming out of the process that requires amendments to 18.2 to also have a look at that. I hope that is clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. I have Peru requesting the floor. Peru, you have the floor.
Sí, Perú apoya el documento, las decisiones y tomar en cuenta los riesgos de cuestiones operativas emergentes, no solo relacionadas a enfermedades, pero de otro tipo también. Gracias.
Thank you, Peru. I have no more parties requesting the floor, so I'll open the floor to non-parties and to observers. Okay, I have no more requests for the floor. So based on our discussions, we have agreed, I think, to adopt the decisions in Annex 1 with the amendments proposed to 19AA little b, 19, where am I, BB, little a, little I, 19CC paragraph B as proposed by the US, and to the 19CC to direct the Standing Committee shall by SC 78. So those are the changes from the US. We've also noted that the budget working group will consider the budget implications of this proposal. And so with that, I think we can conclude our discussions on this matter. So we'll move on to our next item for discussion, CoP19 Doc 12 on the World Wildlife Trade Report. This document has been submitted by South Africa. I'll ask South Africa to introduce it. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document CoP19 Doc 12, submitted by South Africa, invites fellow parties to bridge an important and long-standing gap on trade-related information that is integrated at a global level. The daunting challenges that humanity faces today cannot be solved without knowledge and understanding, as we cannot manage or regulate what we do not measure. I trust you will agree that as CITES approaches its 50th anniversary since it was signed in 1973, it provides an important opportunity to have a clear overall picture of the global wildlife trade regulated under the convention, covering a wide spectrum of issues. And no current reporting system does this, and I dare say it's long overdue. And the question is, how can the world manage and regulate wildlife trade wisely if parties do not have a full picture of wildlife trade? And how can parties explain more effectively to policymakers and the general public what role CITES plays in contributing to sustainable development goals? For this reason, Madam Chair, South Africa proposes the preparation of a periodic World Wildlife Trade Report during each intersessional period between the meetings of the Conference of Parties. And the objective of the proposed report is to help parties make better use of the existing primary data by documenting and analyzing a wide range of aspects of international trade in CITES-listed species. And these include trends, trade routes, and scale of the trade, including its value, as well as the conservation and socio-economic impacts, and the possible linkages between legal and illegal trade across a variety of supply chains. I hope parties had an opportunity to read and reflect on the groundbreaking pilot edition of the World Wildlife Trade Report, available as information document CoP19 Inf 24. This pilot report is a great resource that helps to illustrate and visualize what is envisaged to be achieved. The pilot report is already a milestone that helps to fill a critical information gap. It shows great potential for improvement when active inputs from parties are available that would further enhance the report's relevance, information, and impact. Policymakers and the general public only have a partial understanding of the day-to-day trade-related work of CITES parties. Illegal trade in wildlife and their products is too often under the spotlight in the media, and this information asymmetry often leads to misconceptions about CITES and the wildlife trade. A global wildlife trade report reiterates and illustrates the spirit of CITES parties in seeking to facilitate sustainable, legal, and regulated trade in species and derived products. Independently of varied perspectives, wildlife trade has happened in the past. It's happening at present, and it will continue into the future. As demonstrated in the pilot report, during the 10 years between 2011 to 2020, approximately 3.5 million CITES shipments were reported in direct trade by exporters. This amounted to over 1.26 billion plants, 82 million animals, and an additional 279 million kilograms of products reported by weight. Many parties and members of the public have questions such as, what are the characteristics of wildlife trade taking place in the world currently? Why is there illegal trade in species that are under the watch of the convention? What is the value of the wildlife trade, and what is the quantity of traded wildlife? Which countries are trading in what species or products or species? And what are the conservation and socio-economic outcomes of the wildlife trade to the very species that the convention aims to protect and the people who share the land with them and beyond? Parties should have good insights into such seemingly broad issues so that specific regulatory measures and trade policies can be designed and enhanced. It's also critical to better understand the benefits that sustainable and legal trade brings in comparison to the negative impacts of unsustainable and illegal trade. In many parts of Africa, we know so well that sustainable and legal trade in wildlife can be a critical contributor to the conservation of wild species and their habitats, and to the livelihoods of rural communities that live with wildlife, as well as to our national economies. In closing, Madam Chair, I would like to highlight a few points about this proposal. Firstly, we see this as a party-led process. Therefore, we propose in the draft decision that a working group of the standing committee is created in order to consider issues such as the methodology of data collection and the template of data submission. Secondly, with a view to reducing the reporting burden of parties, the draft decision proposes that parties submit information through existing channels of annual and biennial reports on a voluntary basis. And thirdly, the report is meant to be comprehensive and balanced. As you will have seen in the pilot report, both the positive and negative conservation and socio-economic impacts are analyzed. A key element in responsible and transparent trade-offs that parties make when managing species in complex socio-ecological systems. Fourthly, we are conscious of possible legal constraints and concerns about sharing price data. As shown in the pilot report, price data will not be tied to specific transactions. Rather, it's used to give a general understanding of the value of the trade. And lastly, we are confident that the Standing Committee Working Group and the Secretariat can work out the proposed methodology of data collection in good time, which will allow the Secretariat to prepare the first World Wildlife Trade Report for consideration at COP20. Let's use this COP19 held in Panama to bridge the ideological difference in pursuit of adding value to the strategic vision of CITES and parties by enriching information and understanding the trade dynamics, further enhancing the future outcomes of the almost 50-year-old convention. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I'll open the floor to parties for their reactions. So I have Senegal requesting the floor. Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais très sincèrement féliciter l'Afrique du Sud d'avoir pris l'initiative de préparer un document qui va dans le sens du commerce des espèces sauvages. Elle a cité, entre autres, un certain nombre d'impacts, mais je voudrais bien qu'on ajoute à la liste des impacts l'aspect sanitaire, parce que nous sortons de la COVID-19 qui est quelque part incriminée et liée au commerce de ces espèces. Elle a terminé par une formule que j'ai bien aimée, mais que j'ajouterai en ceci. Elle a bien dit, essayons de surmonter nos différences idéologiques, mais je crois que c'est un ensemble de philosophies et d'approches qui ont un seul dénominateur commun, c'est la gestion durable des ressources dans une bonne conservation. Donc le Sénégal appuie bien et se joindrait si un comité est mis en place, un groupe de travail est mis en place pour approfondir l'idée qui a été brandie par l'Afrique du Sud. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. I see Malaysia.
As this is the first time Malaysia taking the floor, we would like to thank the government of Panama for hosting the conference and congratulate you, Chair, on your appointment in this committee. Malaysia notes the submission by South Africa of this document, which proposes a World Wildlife Trade report that will capture pricing of wildlife, products in trade. Although Malaysia believes the data is valuable and provides a good indicator for future policy planning and supporting the livelihood, we are concerned about the feasibility and reporting burden of parties. Malaysia only supports this to be a voluntary reporting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I see Thailand.
Thank you, Chair. Since this is the first time Thailand takes the floor, I would like to congratulate you, Madam Chair, for being elected as the chair of the committee too, and wish a success on your duty. We also would like to express our thankful appreciation to the government of Panama for the wonderful arrangement of this meeting and for their warm welcome to all delegates. Thailand would like to thank South Africa for this initiative and in preparation of the document 12 on the World Wildlife Trade Report. We also would like to commend the joint efforts of the United Nations Environment Program, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the United Nations Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the International Institute for Environment and Development, Traffic and CITES Secretariat, in preparation of the pilot edition of the World Wildlife Trade Report funded by UNEP and China. Thailand is of the opinion that the proposed World Wildlife Trade Report will potentially provide comprehensive understanding of a range of aspects of international trade in CITES list species, from trends, pattern, and scale to conservation impacts, socio-economic benefits, and the correlation between legal and illegal trade. While the few previous reports on topics such as the trends and patterns of the trade in CITES list species are few and far between. Some report is subject to reporting bias and contains mostly open source data, which should be noted when interpreting findings. The CITES trade database is primarily repository for data on legal wildlife trade and is derived from annual report compiled by parties. However, the large-scale temporal and spatial pattern in wildlife trade remains poorly documented and understood. We believe that the information provided in the World Wildlife Trade Report with the additional data such as the socio-economic data and conservation impact of the trade would be beneficial by enhancing the better understanding on characteristic trade in CITES list species, regulate under CITES to the public, and allowing the concrete decision made by the policy level. Thailand therefore agrees to the proposal on preparation of World Wildlife Trade Report. However, we would like to note that the draft decision contained in Annex 1 to the present document, the 19AA in particular, might be putting too much burden to parties on including price data of and information on conservation impact and socio-economic benefits of trade in CITES list species in the related report of parties. Even the pilot World Wildlife Trade Report shows how price data are intended to be used. We do note that it is important to ensure that the price data are only used to demonstrate the overall monetary value of the trade and is never tied to an individual transaction. Also, the price data will be maintained by a trustworthy long-term partner organization that can truly ensure confidentiality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Thailand. I see Colombia.
Gracias, señora Presidenta. Colombia agradece el documento del Informe Mundial sobre el Comercio de Fauna y Flora Silvestres presentado por Sudáfrica. Ayer tuvimos el gusto de participar en el lanzamiento del reporte durante el evento paralelo organizado por la Secretaría CITES, en el que se presentaron los primeros resultados del reporte, resaltando, entre otros aspectos, los impactos del comercio legal a la conservación de las especies incluidas en las CITES, así como los impactos socioeconómicos de este comercio. Para Colombia es importante llamar la atención sobre este tipo de insumos que tienen un antecedente regional con el estudio de comercio de vida silvestre en los países amazónicos que fue realizado por el Centro de Monitoreo de Conservación Mundial de la ONU Medio Ambiente con el apoyo del Programa Regional Amazónico de GIZ, en colaboración con los países de la OTCA, Bolivia, Brasil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Perú, Surinam y Venezuela. Este tipo de análisis puede mejorar la comprensión del comercio y orientar a las partes a identificar prioridades, implementar y generar conocimiento de interés para los países, y en este sentido se considera significativo que se visibilice la forma en que el comercio legal sostenible y trazable de especies silvestres es una herramienta para conservar las especies y mantener ecosistemas de forma sostenible y que contribuya a mejorar los medios de subsistencia rurales, las economías locales y nacionales y el bienestar de las personas. Colombia apoya la realización de este informe al tiempo que llama la atención sobre la importancia de contar con el apoyo para el acopio de información para los países megadiversos como el nuestro y garantizar que la información presentada dé cuenta de la realidad de la biodiversidad del país. Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Colombia. I see Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia support and agree with the proposal on World Wildlife Trade Report and support adopts the draft decision contained in Annex 1, and we thank for the South Africa for its effort in preparing this proposal. We believe that this report will be an important tool for the contracting parties in pursuing balance between sustainable protection, conservation, and use efforts. We agree with the Secretariat view that World Wildlife Trade Report has the potential to fill an important information gap about the value of the trade in specimen of CITES listed species authorized under the convention. We agree with the proposed way forward, including on the establishment of a working group, and we agree with the price data approach as both proposed by South Africa. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I see Peru.
Gracias. Sí, Perú también apoya la propuesta que brindará la oportunidad para evaluar las tendencias y beneficios del comercio sostenible necesarios para la toma de decisiones. Estaríamos interesados en participar del grupo de trabajo a fin de contribuir con la metodología que se pueda adaptar a los recursos y limitaciones de las partes para el registro de información. Gracias.
Thank you. I see the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. So we would like to, the EU and its member states would like to thank South Africa for the preparation of this document. We generally support the idea of preparing a World Wildlife Trade report. However, we think we still need to discuss a number of issues where uncertainties remain, such as the projected timeline, issues related to additional reporting obligations, as well as with regard to the parties' feasibility of collecting price data and socioeconomic information. Against this background, one possibility would be to establish an intersessional working group in which these issues should be addressed and clarified to eventually better define the report with a view to decide at CoP20. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I see Nigeria.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Since this is the first time Nigeria is taking the floor, I would like to appreciate Madam for your new appointment as a chair of this committee. In Nigeria's position, Nigeria would like to thank South Africa for submitting this document. While appreciating the work and effort of this proposal, we are concerned about the suggestion to have CITES parties collect and share price data of CITES specimens in trade. We were struggling to understand how this information which will be quite onerous to collect, will help to meet the objective of the convention. Our view is that our resources and efforts are better directed to carry out our existing work and building our capacity to issue permits and make CITES funding. Nigeria, therefore, do not support this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. I see New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I thank Panama for hosting this meeting and welcoming us so warmly. And I congratulate you on your appointment to the role of committee chair. We're looking forward to working with you over the next 2 weeks under your guidance. We thank South Africa for this document and all those involved in the development of the World Wildlife Trade Report that's been tabled as an INF document at this meeting. While we see the value in understanding trade patterns through trade value data, we consider it would be appropriate for the Standing Committee to consider this proposal before it is put to the COP for decision. CITES parties already submit their annual trade data, and from this, the value of trade data can be deduced by researchers using standard conversion factors for the value of specific products. It would seem to be an extra burden on CITES authorities all over the globe to try and collect actual values of specimens in trade when one central authority could do such calculations by using standard conversion factors. The information on the value received for specimens being exported is often commercially sensitive and covers only one step in the entire supply chain between collection of the specimen and end product or products. I'm speaking here from the perspective of a relatively small party with a limited capacity. In New Zealand, the collection of value data for CITES purposes would require a change in our legislation, which would be a lengthy process, or alternatively would involve the process of estimation by our management authority. We question the value of individual CITES parties heading down a route that may be better taken by research institutions without fully understanding all the options first. We recommend an alternative approach involving decisions that direct the Secretariat, subject to external funding, to commission a report exploring the values of the World Wildlife Trade Report and the most efficient means of gathering the relevant CITES trade value data for those purposes. And then the Standing Committee can be directed to consider the advice and report on to COP20. Thank you very much.
Thank you, New Zealand. So I still have quite a number of parties wanting to take the floor, so I am closing my list. I still have more than closing the lists. More than 10 parties still asking for the floor. I'm going to take you in batches, so I'll read out who I'm going to take in small groups. I'm asking you, please keep your interventions brief because I want to hear from all of you, but we do need to keep moving so we can make a decision, a recommendation on this point. So I will take Japan, followed by Zambia, followed by Argentina. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Japan would like to thank South Africa for this proposal. Species are traded in various conditions. For example, a product of certain species can have artistic merit and a higher price than the ordinary one. Then there could be no consistency in the price data of each species. Japan would like to point out that there should be careful consideration on validity of the analysis method, including price data. And when preparing a wildlife trade report, sufficient consultation with related parties and transparency in the process for objective analysis are necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Zambia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll definitely be brief. As it is our first time being on the floor, may I take this opportunity to thank the Panamanian government for its warm welcome, and also for the rain that we've been having for the last couple of days, and also to thank you, Chair, for having been appointed to preside over this committee for the next 2 weeks. Chair, I wish to state from the outset that we commend South Africa for the preparation of this report, and definitely quickly propose that it does go to a working group so that we further interrogate what we need to do. Chair, what is very important with this particular report is that we should be able to have data. The reason why we're here at CITES is making decisions based on data. I will speak from where I come from. It's very, very important that we look at opportunities that will allow us to make decisions based on the data that we're having based on trade. And remember, what is very important regarding that particular information is that the communities themselves that we preside over should be able to actually get a share of data, a share of the revenues that is gotten from those particular trade. And if this information is not verified, if this information is not captured properly, then it's very difficult for us to convince them to say this is exactly what we want to do. So I will not waste much time, but to just propose that this particular discussion be sent to a working group so that we further interrogate and should be able to see that it works out okay for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Zambia. Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. La Argentina considera que los datos recopilados por el informe son valiosos, en particular para detectar las tendencias de la oferta y la demanda de los consumidores de productos de vida silvestre. Sin embargo, la Argentina considera que la aplicación de estas decisiones supondría una carga adicional, tanto para las estructuras de las CITES, como la Secretaría y el Comité Permanente, como para las partes, en la presentación de información que no es requerida por el tratado y por las resoluciones. La Argentina considera que el precio de la vida silvestre o de los productos de la vida silvestre no resulta un factor determinante para saber si la vida silvestre en cuestión se ha obtenido de forma legal y sostenible. También nos preocupa, por otro lado, la calidad de los datos que puedan obtenerse, como lo ha expresado anteriormente la delegación de Japón. Por esa razón, la Argentina no está de acuerdo con el proyecto de decisión que figura en anexo 1 del documento 12. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Argentina, and I do appreciate everyone being very brief. So I'm going to take my next group of parties. So I will have Mexico, followed by Botswana, then Israel, and then Lesotho. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. México considera que adoptar la preparación de un informe mundial sobre el comercio de vida silvestre y los proyectos de decisión en su forma actual es prematuro. Aunque un análisis integral del comercio, considerando aspectos ecológicos, económicos y sociales, puede ser útil, es necesario definir primero los objetivos y preguntas que dicho informe debería responder, los análisis a realizar y los datos específicos a compilar, así como los mecanismos para manejar esos datos de manera segura. En este sentido, México propone sustituir las decisiones del documento por unas nuevas que dirijan a la Secretaría a analizar el informe piloto contenido en el documento informativo 24 para desarrollar una propuesta detallada de los objetivos, indicadores y datos necesarios para producir los resultados esperados y preguntas a responder por un informe mundial sobre comercio de vida silvestre, incluyendo la definición de los formatos a utilizar para la colecta de la información y los mecanismos para manejar de manera segura la información sensible. Asimismo, propone una decisión dirigida al Comité Permanente para establecer un grupo de trabajo intersesional para revisar los insumos que genere la Secretaría como resultado de la decisión anterior y para que, en consulta con los comités científicos según sea necesario, emita recomendaciones para consideración de la COP20. De ser necesario, México puede presentar una propuesta puntual de lenguaje a la Secretaría. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you. Mexico, Botswana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Botswana welcomes the initiative by South Africa. We are convinced that the World Wildlife Trade Report will provide much-needed knowledge on trade in CITES-listed species. The report will also serves to demonstrate how sustainable, legal, and traceable wildlife trade can contribute to the conservation of wildlife species and economic development. Botswana is in support of the draft decisions on the collection of wildlife trade information in Document 12, Annex 1, and the preparation of a World Wildlife Trade Report for consideration at COP20. We are in support of the proposal to form an intersessional working group to advance this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Botswana. Israel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We see merits in this report, as well as a number of imperfections. It's unfortunate that the pilot edition of the World Wildlife Trade Report was posted on the CITES website only on the 2nd of November, just a couple of weeks ago, and long after the deadline for submitting documents to be considered by the COP. The pilot report, in our opinion, is a substantive part of this initiative and should have come in within the deadline as part of document 12. We've not had opportunity to examine the pilot report with the care that it deserves, and we anticipate there are many other parties in the same situation. There's not been proper opportunity to study this document, the document that we're being asked to buy. Therefore, we consider the matter should be deferred to COP20, perhaps via a working group during an intersessional period. Nor do we have a good understanding of costs associated with producing this report on a regular basis permanently. The burdens it will impose on parties and the Secretariat and the CITES budget are inadequately described. We also take this opportunity to note that just by a cursory reading of the report indicates that, quote, it aims to demonstrate how sustainable, legal, and traceable wildlife trade can be a tool for the conservation of species, healthy ecosystems, livelihoods, and human well-being, end quote. Overall, the report appears to paint a relatively rosy picture of legal trade. One might even say that it supports facilitating the trade. But the job of CITES is to regulate the trade, and there are serious risks with mixing regulation with facilitation. We're disappointed that the report does not better address one of the principal challenges facing CITES today. That is preventing legal trade from exploiting species to a point where they become depleted and legitimate candidates for listing on the appendices. At each meeting of the COP, we are compelled to include more and more species on the appendices because they've been depleted by relentless exploitation of the legal trade. Committee 1 is hearing proposals of this nature right now. For these reasons, Chair, we cannot support document 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Lesotho, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. This is the first time Lesotho is taking the floor in this meeting, and we would like to congratulate you on your election as the chair of the committee. Lesotho supports and agrees with the proposal on the preparation of the World Wildlife Trade Report as put forward by South Africa. Lesotho also notes the comments of the Secretariat in the document. We strongly believe that the Secretariat and parties have an important role to play in respect of the proposal for additional data on the patterns of international trading in CITES listed species and their economic value. I submit, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lesotho. So I'll go to my next group of parties. I'll take Zimbabwe, followed by Gabon and China. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm also taking the floor for the first time. I would like to start by thanking the government of Panama for organizing this Conference of Parties 19, and also to congratulate you, Chair, for being elected to chair this committee. Madam Chair, I want to start by congratulating and thanking South Africa for this submission. The submission from South Africa is touching on the fundamental objectives of this convention, and Zimbabwe supports the proposal as it will help shed light on some gray areas for objective decision-making. We believe there are various tools and technologies out there that can help us parties in collecting such data, hence it is not a burdensome endeavor at all. It does not help us, Madam Chair, if we continue to make important decisions based on perceptions, yet this convention decision-making processes should be informed and guided by science. Zimbabwe sees this as an important tool that enhances the quality of decisions that parties make. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Gabon, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Après examen du document COP19 Doc 12, qui fait référence à un rapport pilote sur le commerce mondial des espèces sauvages, disponible sous forme de document d'information de la COP19, le Gabon souligne le fait que ce rapport pilote a été réalisé avec l'appui du secrétariat, mais sans délibération préalable des parties. En outre, les projets de décision proposent la création d'un groupe de travail dont le mandat serait de définir les méthodologies appropriées pour la collecte de données. Cela serait prématuré, étant donné que les parties ne se sont pas encore prononcées sur les objectifs, les méthodologies d'analyse, les résultats attendus et les auteurs d'un tel rapport. Par conséquent, le Gabon s'oppose à l'adoption des décisions proposées dans le document COP19 Doc 12. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Gabon. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. China supports the preparation of the International World Wildlife Trade Report based on the CITES database, but China would like to share the similar concerns regarding the price data mentioned before by the colleagues of Thailand, Argentina, and some other parties, and suggests delete the paragraph A in draft decision 19.AA that invites to include the price data of CITES specimens in annual or implementation report, because the price data may relate to commercial secret of the importer and or exporter. And the collection and the submission of such data will greatly increase the work burden on the parties. In paragraph A, in draft decisions 19.AA, BB and paragraph A and C in draft decision 19.cc, there are also several words price, which are also suggested be deleted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. So I come to my final group of parties. I will take Uganda, followed by Kenya, and then Cambodia, and finally the United States of America. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, since it's our first time to speak as Uganda, we would like to congratulate you upon your appointment as the chair of this committee too. Madam Chair, we greatly appreciate the report by the Republic of South Africa proposing to allow us formulate the World Wildlife Trade Report. Madam Chair, we are already reporting and we gather some considerable data that is submitted to the Secretariat every year. In our view, what South Africa is proposing is to analyze this data that we routinely submit to the Secretariat and share with parties in a very highly consolidated report. And this would allow us to enhance transparency, but also learn and share lessons from other parties, what they are doing across the world. But it would also immensely help us to appreciate the relevance of reporting. As it stands today, we do report, but we do not get feedback. So if we could have a report that is well analyzed and compiled, that would provide us lessons for us to be able to enhance our planning and policy formulation, but also raising awareness about the potential benefits that accrue from sustainable legal trade. I wish also to support the submission by other parties that an intersessional working group be constituted to look into this matter further. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kenya will like to thank South Africa for the submission. Madam Chair, we see the intent South Africa and the stakeholders have in having the wildlife trade report, and we'll want to align ourselves with the comments already made by Israel and Mexico, whereas we welcome the analysis of data as explained by Uganda that we already submit to CITES Secretariat. It will be premature to come up with a decision before even agreeing on a party's input to the methodology of doing this analysis, the terms of reference of the group, and how we review the conclusions prior to publication. We want to go along the line and proposals of Mexico to establish a working group that will basically look at how this report is done, is analyzed, and also involve parties in the entire process, other than starting to discuss a report that, as Israel has put it, is being submitted just on 3rd November when some parties were already en route to the Conference of Parties. So, Madam Chair, we do not support the decisions as they currently are. And if the draft proposed by Mexico is circulated, we will be able to look at it so that we see how this report will be produced, how it will be analyzed and interpreted before being submitted to parties for consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Since Cambodia is taking the floor for the first time, I like to comment and congratulate Panama and CITES Secretary for excellent organization of the meeting in this beautiful city. I also congratulate you, Chair, for your nomination as the lead in this important meeting. Cambodia joined ourselves with Thai, with Japan, China, and others. Especially we have the concern in the price data because it may vary from place to place. And this also may cause burden to the party. So we support the creation of the working group to study. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. And finally, United States.
Thank you, Chair. The United States thanks South Africa and notes the document. However, we share the concerns raised by the European Union, Nigeria, New Zealand, and others, and oppose adopting the recommendations of the document. However, we could consider a more streamlined decision to the Standing Committee as suggested by the EU, New Zealand, and Mexico, and support the draft decisions put forward by New Zealand and Mexico to consider the feasibility and the need for a World Wildlife Trade Report to provide any recommendations for consideration and decision at COP20. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I'll just take a moment. Thank you. I've just conferred with the Secretariat on a way forward. So I think we've heard a lot of interest in further analysis, but I think in general the consensus is that it might be a little bit too early to adopt the decisions that have been proposed by South Africa at this point in time. And so what I would like to do, because I've heard some useful language from some parties around some decisions, including to the Standing Committee to consider the matter further, I would like to strike an in-session working group to develop, to consider the discussion that we've had, including some of the draft decisions that have been tabled in this room, to consider preparing decisions including to the Standing Committee and come back with a consolidated proposal to the committee on how to, our next steps. So I will take interest in that working group. So I will ask you now if you can press your buttons if you're interested in participating in that working group, noting that the mandate is just to develop decisions for our next steps on this matter. Just parties, I'm sorry. I will take observers in the next round. Technicians, can we see the bottom of the screen, please? Thank you. Okay, and now I'll take observers. Oh, sorry, actually technicians can, sorry everyone, I just meant to read that out from the start. Sorry, can it, if you were on that list, can you have the photos?
And then there's a second photo.
So, yeah. So I have the European Union, Malaysia, Czech Republic, Peru, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Colombia, South Africa, Thailand, Botswana, Israel, Kenya, Germany, United States of America, Canada, Austria, then I have Colombia, South Africa, Thailand, Botswana, Israel, Kenya, Germany. Yeah, sorry, you're a little bit out of order, so just if I repeat you, Canada, Guinea, Niger, China, Japan. Okay, sorry, we'll clear the list and then I'll take observers. Parties, you can. Thank you. Observers, please. Okay, so I have WWF, SSN, SA Taxidermy Tannery, AZA, WCS, Centre for Biodiversity, Traffic, UNEP WCMC, UNODC, Pass the Parrots, UNEP, Suco SA, Panthera, ACN, Guinea, AWF, and IPPL. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. We're just settling that list and making sure we've got equal representation. I see Guinea asking for the floor. Guinea, you have the floor.
Oui. Merci, Madame, de me passer la parole. Il est très important de rappeler ici que depuis 2013, la Guinée est sous sanction de la CITES par rapport au commerce illicite des espèces inscrites dans l'annexe. Donc, par rapport aux documents présentés par l'Afrique du Sud, la Guinée ne pourrait pas s'aligner sur ce document, en ce sens que dans le document, certainement, les gens n'ont pas tenu compte des potentialités de chaque région par rapport aux biodiversités. Donc, il serait très souhaitable que le document puisse comporter ce facteur très important que nous jugeons vraiment incontournable par rapport aux potentialités. Et je vous remercie.
Okay, thank you everyone. We have our working group. I would like to see if we could find a chair in the room rather than tasking the working group with doing that. I'm seeing some conversations between parties here, and I'm wondering if Canada or the United States perhaps. I could ask the European Union as well, Canada, US. There was a few parties who said that they had language. Okay, the first task of the working group will be to establish a chair. So with that, we look forward to seeing your decisions. Okay, we will move on to CoP19 Doc 17.1, cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions. This document's been prepared by the Standing Committee, so I'll ask the Chair of the Standing Committee to introduce it. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. You moved quickly for me, Chair. Thank you. So we are now looking at document CoP19, Doc 17.1, which was prepared by the Standing Committee on Cooperation with Other Biodiversity-Related Conventions. So COP18 adopted 4 decisions on cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions. The decisions included a report by the Secretariat that was considered at the 74th Standing Committee in March 2022 and included an overview of resolutions and decisions related to synergies, partnerships and cooperation formal and informal partnerships, and resolutions and decisions adopted by other biodiversity-related conventions to address cooperation and partnerships. The Standing Committee at its 74th meeting noted the advice provided by the Secretariat and the importance of synergies and the role of cooperation with other biodiversity-related entities. One of the main challenges is to identify priorities in terms of collaboration, cooperation, and partnerships, essential to enhance implementation of the Convention, its effectiveness and efficiency, and raising its profile. Furthermore, the CITES strategic vision recognizes that parties' efforts to implement the Convention may also provide benefit to and draw strength from efforts being undertaken in other fora. Based on the discussion, the Standing Committee had the following recommendations for consideration and adoption by CoP19. Draft decisions related to the development of a partnership strategy are proposed in Annex 1 of the document. The renewal of Decision 17.55 is proposed in Annex 2, encouraging parties to strengthen synergies among biodiversity multilateral environmental agreements at the national level. The revisions of Decision 17.56 are also contained in Annex 2. The revision includes reference to the outcomes of the Burn 2 workshop to be considered when exploring options consistent with the CITES strategic vision. And finally, the deletion of Decision 18.47 and 18.48. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair of the Standing Committee. I'm opening the floor to parties. Panama, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta, y gracias por el documento. Panamá apoya la adopción de las enmiendas, especialmente en cuanto a la implementación e integración de las discusiones, y esperemos que el pronto y nuevo aprobado Marco Mundial de Biodiversidad post-2020. Es importante que las convenciones de las Naciones Unidas empiecen a hablar entre ellas. CITES regula el comercio internacional, pero las otras ayudan a regular y mantener la conservación de la biodiversidad a nivel nacional. No podemos seguir hablando de cambio climático sin incluir la pérdida de biodiversidad en las conversaciones. Invitamos a que se incluya la colaboración con esta Convención de Cambio Climático, ya que sabemos que muchas de las especies en los apéndices de CITES, al igual que especies que no están listadas y que están dentro de las 52 propuestas de enmienda, ayudan a mitigar el cambio climático. Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Panama. I see Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan thanks to prepare the document. Since we are finally going to discuss post-2020 global biodiversity framework at CBD COP15 in Montreal next month. In 2010, Japan hosted the CBD COP10 in Nagoya, Aichi, and Aichi target was adopted as a global target until 2020. Japan is committed to continue to support the global efforts to conserve and sustainable use of biodiversity. And we strongly expect that the synergy between the CITES and the CBD are strengthened through implementing CITES strategic vision and the post-2020 GBF. And also we will make efforts to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I see China. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China recognizes the efforts of the Secretariat in building synergies with the other multilateral environment agreements. We support the draft decision while noticing that the Wetland and Ramsar Convention are not included. 40% of the world's plants and animals depend on wetlands, and we know that without them, we cannot achieve the sustainable development targets we have just set ourselves. As the host country of Ramsar Convention, COP14, which just concluded 3 days ago, China would like to encourage and contribute to more collaboration between CITES and Ramsar. Thank you.
Thank you, China. I see Brazil. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Brazil understands that cooperation with other international instruments or organizations is extremely important for this convention. We also believe that these partnerships must always be institutionally and structurally appropriate to the achievement of the convention's mandates and goals. Nevertheless, we must keep in mind that conventions, treaties, or other international instruments have specific objectives, which are the main reason for their existence. Thus, they can be complementary to each other. They, however, can never overlap or mix, since it's worth reiterating, each one has its own goals and mandates. Cooperation, therefore, must not imply double efforts, including financial efforts, nor any reinterpretation of commitments previously undertaken under this convention or other international instruments. We must carefully avoid language that might suggest this possibility, including the word synergy, which may lead to results that do not meet our specific mandate under CITES and must be replaced by the term complementarity, therefore. And most specifically, we suggest that the word synergies is replaced by complementarities in paragraphs 17.55 and 17.56 on the Annex 2 of this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I see Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is in our view that an efficient and effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, GBF, requires enhanced cooperation and synergies between the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and other biodiversity-related conventions, such as CITES. The outcomes of the Bern 1 and Bern 2 consultation workshop of biodiversity-related conventions on the post-2020 GBF include concrete conclusions on the involvement of the relevant conventions in the development and implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Further details on the conclusions of the Bern 1 and Bern 2 workshop can be found in CoP19 Inf.11. Switzerland welcomes UNEP's commitment to continue its support across biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements to facilitate the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. According to the Resolution 13/2022 that was adopted at the GB9 ITP GRFA in September 2022 in New Delhi, and Resolution 18.28 adopted at Ramsar COP14 last week, the Bern process has been formalized and UNEP is invited to continue facilitating the Bern process among parties to the biodiversity-related conventions and thereby contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted. Building on the successful experience of Bern 1 and Bern 2, and in order to ensure strengthened cooperation among parties of the biodiversity-related conventions in the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, we suggest to give a solid mandate for the CITES parties to participate in the continuation of the Bern process. We therefore suggest the following amendments to the decisions in Annex 2 of this document. Directed to the parties, we would like to add a sentence at the end after capacity building activities. They are further encouraged to actively engage in the Bern process, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 and Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted. And then we would like to include a new paragraph directed to the Secretariat, welcoming UNEP's commitment to continue its support across biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements to facilitate the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the Secretariat is requested to actively engage in the Bern process, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. We might just take your additions, your insertions again, please, a little bit slower, starting with the first one on decision 1755.
Okay. So, directed to the parties, after the existing text capacity building activities, we would like to add, they are further encouraged to actively engage in the Bern process, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted.
Thank you, and now we'll take your new paragraph directed to the Secretariat. Thank you.
The new paragraph directed to the Secretariat, welcoming UNEP's commitment to continue its support across biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements to facilitate the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Secretariat is requested to actively engage in the Bern process, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted.
Thank you, Switzerland. I see the European Union followed by the United States and then Georgia. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. And first of all, we would like to express our thanks to the Secretariat for compiling the report on partnership and cooperation between multilateral environment agreements dealing with the biological diversity and ensure that EU supports strengthening the biodiversity MEA collaboration in the future to jointly tackle global biodiversity crisis. Therefore, we agree with the draft decision outlined in the annex of the document and support the work towards a partnership strategy. And we also highlight that setting priorities should be an important goal for such a strategy. The EU does not support the Swiss proposal being too prescriptive, namely if the global biodiversity framework and its monitoring mechanism have not been adopted yet. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Consistent with longstanding U.S. position, the United States appreciates the work of the Secretariat and the Standing Committee in raising the profile of CITES and continuing to seek appropriate and mutually beneficial cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions. We further appreciate that collaboration among the Secretariats of various conventions can also be useful. We wish to ensure continued cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions while minimizing the extent to which such coordination overextends the Secretariat's resources or could lead to activities that go beyond the scope and mandate of each convention. We support the spirit of the draft decisions and the revisions to decisions 17.55 to 17.56, and we agree with the proposed deletions. However, we are concerned with the cost of the proposed work in question as well as the demands on the Secretariat's time. We also caution that it is important to ensure that CITES' level of engagement on these activities is commensurate to the benefits of our convention. The United States continues to believe that leveraging of synergies at the national level is where parties can be most effective and efficient, and we appreciate that Decision 17.55 acknowledges that. The United States also supports the Secretariat's suggestion, paragraph 4 of the present document 17.1, to form an intersessional working group at SC 76 to advance the objective of developing a partnership strategy. We note that CITES partnerships with other intergovernmental bodies and conventions may be especially important for addressing zoonotic disease risk in the international wildlife trade. A partnership strategy may wish to consider any relevant recommendations that are adopted here at COP19 from those discussions. The United States welcomes the negotiations on the Global Biodiversity Framework and looks forward to the conclusion of an ambitious GBF. However, the United States opposes Switzerland's proposal that UNEP have a role in coordinating biodiversity-related MEAs. The role of UNEP is limited to administrative functions. Coordination among MEAs, particularly in the context of the GBF, is substantive and programmatic in nature and is thus inappropriate. It is important to maintain the autonomy of each individual MEA and not suggest that their substantive activities could be directed by UNEP. Finally, it would not be appropriate for CITES parties to request that UNEP do anything, but in particular, it is beyond the scope of this convention to suggest that UNEP coordinate across the biodiversity MEAs. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. And I'll take Georgia. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let me thank the Standing Committee and the Secretariat for the work undertaken on this agenda item. We consider the cooperation and synergy among the MEAs, especially the biodiversity-related conventions, as extremely important for successful implementation of all conventions and achieving our common goals. We are also of the view that the CITES agenda should be fully integrated in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and subsequently the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. This will ensure higher political attention to CITES at the national level and create additional funding opportunities for implementation of CITES. We consider that cooperation is the most useful at the national level. However, we see merit in cooperation at the global level as well. We also welcome the Bern process initiated by Switzerland and very much supported continuation of this process. In this regard, we support the new draft decisions presented in the document COP19 Doc 17.1, as well as the revised draft decisions, including the proposal suggested by Switzerland. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Georgia. And I will take one final party. I will take Argentina before I turn to the observers. Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Sobre el tema de la cooperación con otros acuerdos multilaterales sobre medio ambiente, la Argentina opina que a la visión estratégica de las CITES le falta debate, por lo cual considera conveniente pasar este tema a la COP20, por lo que las enmiendas de las decisiones 17.55 y 17.56 que figuran en el anexo 2 del presente documento quedarían, en la opinión argentina, para un futuro trabajo. Sin embargo, la Argentina está de acuerdo con suprimir las decisiones 18.43 y 18.48 en el entendimiento de que ellas ya fueron implementadas. Por último, la Argentina se opone a los proyectos de decisión que figuran en el anexo 1 del presente documento, dado el costo excesivo que implican, como ya fuera mencionado por la delegación de los Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Argentina. I've noticed Brazil has asked for the floor. I'm closing my list after Brazil, and then I will go to observers. So I will take Brazil as my last party. Thank you. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor once again. We just would like to comment on the proposal made by Switzerland. We support every effort to implement the global biodiversity framework when approved, when adopted, and we urge other parties to commit to it. However, in order to react more specifically to the proposal made by Switzerland, we would like to have the text proposed projected on the screen or to receive it so that we could reflect on it more carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'd like to open the floor to observers who might like to comment. Thank you. I have CBD and CMS, so I'll take them in that order. CBD, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity appreciates the strong collaboration with the CITES Secretariat and the Secretariat of Biodiversity-related conventions, especially in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The CITES bodies and other biodiversity-related conventions, as well as the Rio conventions, have participated in the Bern process on the consultation of the post-2020 GBF. This inclusive process affirmed the importance of the Global Biodiversity Framework to all the conventions to the extent that it converges with their mandates. It identifies specific elements that could be included in the framework and its monitoring mechanism and the ways in which convention can be further, other convention can further contribute to the implementation of the post-2020. At the level of the UN system, CITES and CBD secretariats continues collaborating under the Environmental Management Group to mainstream biodiversity in UN policies and programs through the UN Common Approach to Biodiversity, as well as under the Liaison Group on Biodiversity-related conventions. Collaborative partnership on sustainable wildlife management to support the development of strategies and policies to conserve and sustainably use wildlife and other joint programs. The third meeting of the CBD subsidiary body on implementation and the CITES Standing Committee prepared guidance to their bodies and the secretariats to further strengthen synergies among the conventions at the national and international levels and the context of their strategic frameworks. The CITES COP now has the opportunity to do likewise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CBD. I will take CMS. Thank you, CMS. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to underscore the importance of cooperation between national focal points, secretariats, and stakeholders of CITES and CMS, given the many species that appear in the appendices of both conventions, as well as other shared areas of interest. CMS and CITES are sister conventions and complement one another, with the mandate of each covering areas that are outside the scope of the other, which are very relevant for the interests of both. CMS uniquely provides a means for range states to address transboundary cooperation for migratory species of wild animals that cross national borders. The area-based conservation work of CMS, with our focus on ecological connectivity, as well as our work to address key threats to species, including those from climate change, linear and energy infrastructure, light pollution, noise pollution, and chemicals, to name a few, helps to improve the conservation status of species listed in CITES appendices. Likewise, the work of CITES to regulate trade supports the conservation status of many CMS species. But we can do much more to address the common threats to CITES and CMS species, including the motivations for illegal and unsustainable taking of wild animals, whether destined for international markets or for purely domestic markets or other domestic uses, as well as cooperate on the solutions. CMS has been working for many years on zoonotic diseases and would welcome collaboration with CITES, and work on human-wildlife conflicts as well as livelihoods are two areas where additional cooperation would be welcomed. I would like to note that there are several agenda items being considered at COP19 relevant to specific areas of cooperation between our two conventions, including item 17.4 on the African Carnivore Initiative, item 73 on the jaguar, and multiple items regarding wildcats, and we welcome the support of the COP for these important areas of joint work. Finally, on the matter of implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, I would just note that there has been a lot of active engagement by all of the biodiversity MEA secretariats, not only through the burn process that's been mentioned, but through the BLG, the Biodiversity Liaison Group. We're having a side event at the CBD, and I believe there's text in the CBD draft documents for their COP, which will address this matter further. So it might be helpful to look at that as the parties here consider next steps. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CMS. So I have no more requests for the floor, so I'd like to sum up what I've heard. So we've had some suggested amendments to the decisions in Annex 2, but I haven't heard those amendments pick up particular support. In fact, I've heard several of them opposed. We have heard mostly support for the decisions in Annex 1, and we have had support for the deletion of decisions 1847 and 1848. So I would propose that the committee recommends that the COP adopt the draft decisions in Annex 1, adopt the revisions to Decision 1755 Rev COP 18 and 1756 Rev COP 18 in Annex 2, as they are presented in the document, and to delete decisions 1847 and 1848. And I'd also just like to note, to note the concerns that were raised by several parties about the time and cost concerns for the Secretariat. I'll note those so that those are included in the record. Brazil, you're requesting the floor. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil has suggested two short exchanges on the revised decisions on the language exchange to exchange synergies for complementarities. And as far as I understood, I didn't hear any opposition in this committee, so I would ask you to consider these suggestions, please.
Thank you, Brazil. I also didn't hear anyone support your amendment, which was why I didn't include it in my summation. I would be interested if anyone wanted to add their support for Brazil's proposal to amend, and that was the proposal to change the word synergies in both of those decisions to complementarities. I will take Gabon, who's asking for the floor, and then if anybody else would like to support Brazil's proposal, I will take you to Gabon. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, de nous avoir donné la parole. Le Gabon remercie le comité permanent pour avoir préparé ce document concernant les synergies et les partenariats entre la CITES et les autres accords multilatéraux relatifs à la biodiversité. Le Gabon remercie également le Canada pour la présentation de ce document. Il est en effet temps que tous les instruments de suivi et de gestion de la biodiversité travaillent en bonne synergie et mutualisent les efforts, car au final, l'objectif ultime poursuivi par toutes ces conventions et accords internationaux reste la préservation de la biodiversité à l'échelle globale. Madame la Présidente, le Gabon tient à notifier la pertinence de ce travail mené par le comité permanent et soutient donc les recommandations figurant au paragraphe du document COP19 DOC 17.1. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Gabon. I have two parties asking for the floor, but I would ask that, are your comments related to the intervention from Brazil regarding the language? And if you could keep your comments, if possible, on that topic, that would be welcome. Senegal, you have the floor.
Oui, madame, merci. Je crois que là, on est en train de jouer sur des concepts, mais qui renvoient à quoi? La finalité, c'est la collaboration entre les conventions qui ne peuvent pas intervenir sur un milieu commun de façon sectorielle. Synergie, coopération, complémentarité. Pour moi, ça renvoie à la même chose parce que le fond, c'est un ensemble d'activités pour aller vers une vision commune. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to support Brazil's suggested edit from synergies to complementarities. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have the European Union asking for the floor. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We consider the term synergy as common in other multilateral environmental agreements dealing with biodiversity, as well as a part of the standard United Nations language, and therefore we support the idea to keep the term, which is, by the way, also used outside the biological or ecological sciences, to keep the word synergy.
So, parties, we've heard one party in support of the amendments proposed by Brazil, one party acknowledging that they feel that it reports the same concept, and one opposing the proposal from Brazil. I think we can make some progress, but I am in your hands because it's okay. Canada is asking for the floor. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I guess I will firstly say that Canada supports the decisions as they were agreed at the Standing Committee. We are, of course, highly engaged in ensuring the delivery of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and we look forward to those parties who will be joining us in Montreal next month. With regard to the question from Brazil, we appreciate the intervention, but it is our preference to retain the word synergies. It is how we discussed it in the Standing Committee, and we have, in our view, a fairly strong understanding that the intent here is to look for those opportunities where mandates align and we can work in a synergistic fashion in order to create efficiencies in achieving common objectives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada, and thank you for reminding us that this is a proposal from the Standing Committee who are comfortable with the language on synergies. I see Georgia requesting the floor. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. If that helps, we also oppose the suggestion from Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. So I think now I'm hearing with the reminder from Canada that the language on synergies is the proposed language from the Standing Committee, which has had some significant discussion. And seeing several parties opposing the amendment by Brazil and only one party supporting it, I think we will move forward as I had proposed to adopt the decisions in Annex 2 as they are written and proposed by the Standing Committee. Okay, and with that we will move on. We will move on to CoP19 Doc 17.2 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. This document has been submitted by the Plants Committee. I'd like to ask the Chair of the Plants Committee to introduce the document. And the chair of the Plants Committee has asked Australia to introduce the document. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm introducing this document on behalf of the Plants Committee. At its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted decisions 18.49 to 18.51 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. The decisions directed the Secretariat and Plants Committee to update the report on the contribution of CITES to the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation and consider any future revisions to Resolution Conf 16.5 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation 2011 to 2020. As a program of work under the Convention on Biological Diversity, the future of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation is yet to be decided under the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As such, the Plants Committee was limited in its ability to progress work on these decisions following the 18th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The Plants Committee has submitted CoP19 Doc 17.2 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, proposing new draft decision 19AA in Annex 1 to the present document, directed to the Plants Committee and the Secretariat to review the outcomes of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and in particular, the future of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation as part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Plants Committee and Secretariat are also directed to draft, if considered appropriate, a revision to Resolution Conf 16.5 on cooperation with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation 2011 to 2020, and report its recommendations to the Standing Committee or to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The Secretariat has provided its recommendations in the document, proposing deletion of draft decisions 18.49 to 18.51, and that the Conference of the Parties adopt draft decision 19AA. The Secretariat also proposes minor editorial amendments and a new draft decision 19BB that directs the Standing Committee to consider any report from the Plants Committee and the Secretariat and convey its recommendations on the future collaboration of CITES and the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. CITES continues to play an important role in the sustainable use of plant species, and cooperation with an updated global strategy for plant conservation, once adopted, will further support efforts to conserve and sustainably use wild species of flora globally. The Plants Committee invites the Conference of the Parties to adopt the draft decisions in CoP19 Doc 17.2 so that this important global collaboration can continue for the coming decade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. On behalf of the Plants Committee, I'll open the floor to parties. United States of America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports adoption of the draft decision in document COP Doc 17.2, as well as the additional draft decision directed to the Standing Committee recommended by the Secretariat in its comments. However, we do not believe that the Plants Committee should be able to choose to report to the Standing Committee or the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Rather, the Plants Committee should report directly to the Standing Committee, and then the Standing Committee can carry the recommendation forward to the COP. We therefore recommend deletion of, quote, or the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, end quote, from the draft decision 19.8a. The United States also supports the Secretariat's recommendation to delete decisions 18.49 to 18.51. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I don't have any other parties at the moment asking for the floor. So I will open to observers, if there are observers who would like to take the floor. I don't have any other requests for the floor. So I think the committee recommends that the COP adopt the decisions in Annex 1 with the amendments proposed by the Secretariat, as well as the deletion proposed by the United States to the revised decision 19AA directed to the Plants Committee and Secretariat, which would delete in paragraph C all the text at the end of that row, or the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties as appropriate, and adopting the new draft decision 19BB. We also recommend the deletion of decisions 1849, 1850 and 1851. Okay, we'll move on to CoP19 document 17.3, cooperation with the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This document has been submitted by the Animals Committee and it will be introduced by the Chair. This document has been submitted by the Standing Committee and will be introduced by the Chair of the Animals Committee. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, I present this document on behalf of the Standing Committee. At COP18, Resolution Conf 18.4 on the cooperation with IPBES was adopted. It instructs the Standing Committee working with the chairs of the Plants and Animals Committee to make sure that the collaboration with IPBES is beneficial to both entities, that the communication between CITES and IPBES is effective, to promote the needs of the scientific authorities and management authorities in IPBES, to make sure that they are to be supported by the scientific work of IPBES, that input from CITES to IPBES is delivered. In paragraph 4 of that resolution, the parties instructed the Standing Committee to report to COP on its activities in relation to the collaboration with IPBES. The document before you contains the activities carried out by the 3 committees and the Secretariat. Paragraphs 4 to 6 summarize the activities carried out by the Secretariat, in particular in relation to the MOC, Memorandum of Cooperation, between the 2 Secretariats, the input by the CITES Secretariat to the IPBES workshop on biodiversity and pandemics, and the notifications issued to encourage parties to CITES to engage in the IPBES processes. Paragraph 7 describes the involvement of the chairs of the 3 committees and the Secretariat in meetings of IPBES. Of particular relevance to CITES is the IPBES assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species. The assessment was adopted at the 9th meeting of the IPBES plenary, which was held from 3rd to 9th July 2022. The Secretary General of CITES and the Chair of the Animals Committee attended the plenary and provided inputs to the launch of the assessment. The IPBES thematic assessment of the sustainable use of wild species is likely to contain many references to CITES and will be of relevance to the implementation of the Convention. Consequently, the Standing Committee proposes that the Conference of the Parties adopts the self-explanatory draft decisions in Annex 1 to the present document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair of the Animals Committee. With the indulgence of the parties, I thought it might be helpful for us to go to IPBES to make a statement. If we're comfortable with that, I'm seeing nods and no opposition, so I will ask IPBES to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to all. It is an honor and a great pleasure to IPBES to take the floor for the first time at a conference of the parties to CITES, and to do so in Panama City, which saw the birth of IPBES 10 years ago. In these 10 years, IPBES has produced a scientifically robust knowledge base regarding biodiversity with the first ever global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services in 2019, and 9 other reports on key biodiversity topics, including the recently approved assessment of the sustainable use of wild species. This assessment of the sustainable use of wild species was made in response to requests from CITES, from the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as from many individual governments and other stakeholders. It was produced by about 100 scientists and other knowledge holders from all regions of the world, assisted by 200 contributing authors who together analyzed more than 6,000 scientific articles, as well as sources of indigenous and local knowledge. So let me quickly share four of the major conclusions of this report. First, the assessment showed how billions of people around the world rely on over 50,000 wild species for food, energy, medicine, and other uses, and that in both low and high income countries. 70% of the world's poor are directly dependent on wild species, and wild species are central to the identity and livelihood of indigenous people and local communities. Second, the assessment found that status and trends in the use of wild species vary depending on type and scales of use and social ecological contexts. Globally, 34% of marine wild fish are overfished, and populations of many terrestrial plants and animals are declining due to unsustainable use. But fish stocks, as well as population of terrestrial plants and animals, are also increasing where there are robust management systems. So third, what drives unsustainable uses? Well, global trade has been a major driver of increased use over the past 40 years and leads to unsustainable use when not properly managed. Illegal harvesting and trade in wild species are another driver of unsustainable use. Future scenarios indicate that growing human populations and associated consumption will result in greater pressure on the use of wild species, and that this will be exacerbated by climate change. So fourth, the report pays a lot of attention to options for action and concludes that effective policies and tools exist and are most effective when they pay attention not only to the ecological context, but also to the social and cultural context in which they are applied. They are most effective when they support fairness, rights, and equity, and when they are supported by robust and adaptive institutions which are inclusive and include participatory mechanisms. And it further notes that indicators of sustainable use of wild species are poorly developed in global indicators such as those used for the Sustainable Development Goals, and that they in particular fail to capture key social ecological linkages which could inform on actual sustainable use of wild species. Long-term monitoring is essential, but is limited and lacking for many species. And then finally, and importantly, the report also notes that there is much to learn from indigenous people and local communities who continue to fish, to gather and hunt on lands that coincide with approximately 40% of high biodiversity conserved areas in 87 countries around the globe. This sustainability is the result of indigenous knowledge, practices, and rules that have enabled sustainable use for generations, including monitoring and mechanisms for adaptive management. So to conclude, IBES hopes that this report and its other reports will form a relevant contribution to your work, to inform the work of CITES, and IBES very much looks forward to continued collaboration with CITES. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IBES. I'd like to open the floor to parties. We are asked to note the report and to consider the draft decisions in Annex 1. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan welcomes the systematic assessment of the sustainable use of wild species of the IPBES, which compiled the latest available scientific knowledge, and appreciates many experts who dedicate for this important work. In its relation to CITES, attention should be paid to key messages of summary policymakers, especially Section C, that is, key elements and conditions for sustainable use of wild species, and Chapter 4 of the assessment. Because the assessment provides CITES a community with important insights, including social and ecological contexts, to be considered in order to ensure sustainable use of wild species for their conservation. Therefore, we support adaptation of the draft decisions contained in Annex 1 to the present document to make full use of the assessment through reviewing and consider necessary actions by the CITES committees as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I will take New Zealand, followed by the European Union, and followed by Norway. So New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand thanks the Standing Committee for this document, and we welcome the IPBES thematic study. New Zealand is actively engaged in both CITES and IPBES, and we support the decisions that are proposed in this document. We note that the IPBES thematic assessment on sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity and strengthening capacities and tools is available now, and the process set out in the decisions providing for the review of the study will not conclude until COP20. In our view, the consideration of the report by parties need not wait until CITES COP20, and we suggest an additional decision is included, directed to parties, inviting them to consider the key messages and elements of the document in line with the Secretariat's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I see the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. First of all, we thank the Secretariat and the Standing Committee for the document, and also thank the chairs of the Standing Committee, Animals Committee, and Plants Committee for representation of the Convention in the launch of the assessment report on sustainable use of wild species at 19th plenary of IPBES, which was held last July in Bonn, and also for submitting the report of the Standing Committee work on IPBES. We consider IPBES as a really important bridge between science and policy, acting reasonably in the interface between these two activities. I'm not going to repeat the importance of the global biodiversity and ecosystem services report published by IPBES, but also we very much welcome the assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species, because it really provides us with the best science available. But also we would like to stress that we agree with the draft decision included in the Annex 1 of the document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I see Norway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We want to thank the Standing Committee for the submission of this document, and we'd like to highlight the importance of the continued cooperation between CITES and IPBES. And we would like to echo the view expressed by the Japanese delegation, and we support the adoption of the decisions as found in Annex 1 to this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. I'm going to open the floor to observers, but just noting that we have a proposal from New Zealand for an additional decision. I'm interested in views on that, and if anyone has any suggested language. So this is a proposal from New Zealand for a decision directed to the parties, inviting the parties to consider the IPBES thematic assessment, rather than waiting for the Animals and Plants Committees and the Standing Committee to consider it and report to COP20. I'd welcome any suggestions on that. While parties are mulling that, perhaps I will take some observers. So I see HSI. HSI, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry it wasn't working originally. Madam Chair, I was one of the reviewers of the IPBES report, and of course it's extremely comprehensive and lengthy. I would suggest that it may be premature to follow the direction suggested by New Zealand. There are still some outstanding aspects of this report. The full number of chapters was not really made available until October, and I was informed at the IPBES side event that the comments of reviewers with responses, which are an important part of this report, will not be available until February. The revision of the IPBES report between the first and second drafts
Some areas relating to CITES were quite thoroughly revised, others were not. And I think that it would be unwise to look too much at the final, at what we have currently in front of us, until the technical committees have had a chance to review the entire document, including the comments and responses made by reviewers, to determine if all aspects of it are appropriate for this convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, HSI. I have the United States asking for the floor, so I'll go to them. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States takes note of the document and supports the draft decisions in Annex 1. We appreciate the work of the Secretariat, the Standing Committee, and the Animals and Plants Committees in engaging and ensuring that CITES interests are considered in IPBES discussions. Continued coordination between CITES and IPBES is important, and we encourage CITES to continue this activity in a manner that benefits and does not detract from core CITES work. The United States supports the review of the scientific aspect of the IPBES thematic assessment of the sustainable use of wild species and the consideration of their relevance to the implementation of the convention. The United States also supports the dissemination of the results of their review and any additional or associated recommendations as appropriate to the Standing Committee. So that is to say, that with respect to the proposal from New Zealand, we support the original decisions as drafted so that the technical committees can review it beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you, United States, and thank you for reflecting on the point that I made about New Zealand's proposal. I'm not seeing any other requests for the floor, so I'm going to take that as we note New Zealand's suggestion, but we do not adopt a new decision directed to the parties. So seeing nobody objecting with that way forward, I'm proposing that Committee 2 recommends that the Conference of Parties notes the document and adopts the draft decisions contained in Annex 1 to the present document as written. So we will move on to document 17.4, Joint CITES CMS African Carnivores Initiative. This document has been prepared by the Secretariat, and I will ask the Secretariat to introduce the document. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you say, I'm going to be referring to document 17.4 on the Joint CITES CMS African Carnivore Initiative. Chair, the Secretariat was requested to report on the implementation of Decision 1856 to the present meeting, hence this document. The African Carnivores Initiative was included in the joint programme of work with the Convention on Migratory Species at the request of the Conference of the Parties. And in collaboration with the CMS Secretariat and IUCN, the Secretariat developed a draft programme of work for the African Carnivores Initiative, which was placed before the 73rd meeting of the Standing Committee last year. The Standing Committee subsequently agreed to a programme of work through an intersessional decision-making process on the 13th of September last year, and we circulated the final draft programme of work in a notification to the parties after that. The draft programme of work was then submitted to the CMS Standing Committee, and it was agreed there as well, and so it's now ready for implementation. With COVID travel restrictions largely lifted, we've been in discussions with our colleagues in the CMS Secretariat about holding a second African African Carnivore Initiative Range State meeting, and with funding from the CMS side and from the CITES side provided by Switzerland and the European Union, for which we record our grateful thanks. We're looking to hold this workshop in April next year. Now, Chair, turning to the existing decisions 1856 to 1861, the Animals Committee made some very helpful suggestions for rolling these forward into the next intersessional period, and you can find a combined package of the proposed new decisions in Annex 1 of this document. Now, the aim of these revised decisions is to use the platform of the African Carnivores Initiative to drive forward the implementation of relevant COP resolutions and decisions relating to African carnivores. And I should add, to support recommendations and decisions of the Convention on Migratory Species with regard to these species. So synergy between biodiversity MEAs in action, if you will. The Secretariat commends the decisions in Annex 1 of this document to the Conference of the Parties, and we urge their adoption, and that the Conference of the Parties, if this is agreed, then agreed to delete documents 1856 to 1858, which would be superseded by the new documents. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And as I did with the previous paper, with the indulgence of parties, I thought we might like to hear from CMS as this is a joint initiative before I open the floor to parties. CMS, if you're prepared to take the floor, we would welcome you. Thank you, CMS. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. The CMS Secretariat would like to thank the CITES Secretariat for the comprehensive report on the joint CITES-CMS African Carnivores Initiative and the recommendations contained in the document before us, which the CMS Secretariat fully supports. Just like our colleagues from the CITES Secretariat, we would further like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the generous funding from the European Union and Switzerland received by the CITES Secretariat towards the African Carnivores Initiative, including funding towards a second African ACI range states meeting. Together with funding received by the CMS Secretariat from the federal government of Belgium and the Flemish government, as well as Switzerland, there is now sufficient funding available to convene a second ACI range state meeting, as called for in the ACI program of work, which was approved by both conventions standing committees last year, as we have heard already. This meeting of the ACI will provide an opportunity for the ACI range states to prioritize the activities contained in the program of work, to explore a governance and administrative structure, including options for funding of the ACI, to take stock of completed or ongoing activities that already contribute to the implementation of the ACI program of work, and review the roadmap for the conservation of the leopard in Africa, as well as the guidelines for the conservation of lions in Africa. The CMS Secretariat is looking forward to jointly organizing this meeting with the CITES Secretariat in April 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. So I open the floor to parties. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, we would like to express our thanks to the Secretariat for providing us with the document in front of us. And also, we would like to express once again our interest in further developing this joint initiative. We believe that the cooperation between CITES and CMS will be beneficial for the conservation of African carnivores. We welcome the deployment of CITES CMS African Carnivore Initiative through a joint program of work, organization of regular range state meetings, and the establishment of a sustainable funding mechanism. Finally, we support the amendment to the draft decision 19AA to ensure that Animals Committee is actively consulted regarding the activities and outputs of the initiative as suggested by the Animals Committee and several observer organizations at the last Standing Committee meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. And for the sake of our time, Brazil will refrain from raising again the discussion on replacing synergies with complementarities, as we have already done in relation to document 17.1. We just want to mention in this regard that in our view, synergies and complementarities are different concepts. The idea of synergies can lead to actions that go beyond the mandate of each of the agreements to which we are all parties. And this is not desirable, nor even allowed. Also, if conventions or other international instruments overlap or mix, as it is implied in the idea of synergy, they risk becoming redundant and therefore irrelevant. We will be attentive to these debates in the future meetings of the Standing Committee, and we hope we can work constructively to achieve greater precision in the language adapted. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Niger, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Donc, le Niger apprécie ce document qui a été soumis dans le cadre de la conservation des carnivores. Le Niger souhaite que cette initiative puisse être un canal pour la conservation à travers les financements, afin qu'on puisse y avoir des financements durables pour la conservation de ces espèces. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Niger. I'm looking to see if there are any other parties who might be seeking the floor on this one. I don't see any other parties immediately asking for the floor, so I will open the floor to observers. I see Conservation Force asking for the floor. Conservation Force, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Being our first intervention, let me congratulate you for the way you are conducting this meeting, and also thanking the government of Panama and the people of Panama for the exquisite hospitality. I will be quite brief, Madam Chair. We still maintain some doubts about this initiative, especially on the CMS listed carnivores, because we do not believe that crossing international borders is a scientific reason to list a species as migratory. We have severe doubts, and as you know, some African parties have lodged reservation on this listing. The second thing, Madam Chair, is that we really do hope that this initiative will use a bottom-up approach, in the sense that the needs of the African range states come as a priority and not as one of the least things to be seen. So we really would like to see a need assessment on the conservation needs of the species, a need assessment of the range states before conducting any work on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Conservation Force. I will take one moment to see if there's any other speakers. Not having any other speakers. Committee 2 adopts the existing, revised and new draft decisions on the joint CITES CMS African Carnivores Initiative contained in Annex 1 to the present document, and we recommend the deletion of decisions 18.56 to 18.58 on joint CITES CMS African Carnivores Initiative. We will move on to COP19 document 17.5 on the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. This document has been prepared by the Secretariat, so I'll ask the Secretariat to introduce it. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The document was prepared by the Secretariat and reports on the implementation of Resolution Conf 11.3, Rev COP18, Paragraph 9b, and Decision 1813. It provides an overview of the broad range of activities conducted under the auspices of IQIC, the collaborative effort established in 2010 between the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, UNODC, the World Bank, and the WCO. In the interest of time, I will not go into detail, and the document includes a broad range of activities conducted as per the focus areas of the strategic program, and details how IQIC has been engaging and working with parties globally to combat wildlife crime. A side event was organized on 15th of November, and another will be organized on 17 November to highlight some examples of operational support and new and enhanced tools and services, such as the second edition of the IQIC Toolkit, which is available as Information Document 26. In addition to what is reported in the document, the new IQIC website will be launched at tomorrow's side event also. The document also includes an update on the IQIC Vision 2030, which will guide the work of the consortium in the decade to come. The vision takes into account the over 70 responses received to Notification 2021 number 14, issued by the Secretariat to consult with parties and other stakeholders on the development of IQIC's future program of work. It was also refined based on additional consultations in September 2021 and September 2022. The Secretariat thanks all parties that provided feedback throughout this process. The vision and its associated strategic action plan for 2023-2026 are available as Information Document 25 and will be launched at a side event on 18 November. Feedback received from parties that benefited from IQIC support highlights that the broad range of tools, services, support, and capacity building activities provided by the consortium continues to be well received and are delivering positive results. This work would have not been possible without strong donor support, and on behalf of IQIC, the Secretariat thanks the European Union, France, Germany, Monaco, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. Contributions from the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of China, Norway, and the United States of America to the Secretariat also contributed to the work and coordination of IQIC. IQIC stands ready to continue to engage with parties in the decade to come, and the Conference of the Parties is invited to adopt draft decisions contained in Annex 1 and delete Decision 1813. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. So the floor is open for parties. So I will take the United Kingdom, followed by China.
The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this document and providing an update on IQIC activities and the 2030 vision. The illegal wildlife trade undermines our collective efforts at CITES to ensure that the international trade of flora and fauna is both legal and sustainable. Therefore, we welcome the consortium's role in mobilising international efforts to combat wildlife crime, underpinned by providing the tools, services and technical support needed to address these. The UK is a proud supporter of the current IQIC strategic programme and commends the progress made by the consortium set out in the working document. Tools such as the IQIC Indicator Framework and the IQIC Wildlife and Forest Crime Analytic Toolkit can assist parties and non-state actors to identify gaps in resources in responses to wildlife and forestry crime. The UK itself was pleased to undertake the IQIC Toolkit assessment in 2021. The systematic use of these tools should be promoted to support a move towards more well-rounded and comprehensive evaluation of effective interventions. In this regard, the UK has submitted an information document 80 to highlight challenges with over-reliance on seizure data. Looking to the 2030 vision, we fully support the 5 identified critical outcomes of reducing opportunity and increasing deterrence, detection, disruption, underpinned by evidence-based action, knowledge exchange, and collaboration. Monitoring, evaluating, and learning from our efforts is key to ensuring that we move more quickly towards our shared goals.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I will go to China. I'm just noting that we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take a few interventions on this, specific, if we can, to the recommendations in the paper, because I would like us to finish on time for lunch. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document well captures the activities conducted under the auspice of IQIC. The positive law enforcement results could not be achieved without the joint efforts from the countries and the regions. On the supply chain, and IQIC plays the role of bringing relevant authorities and entities together, which is complex and meaningful. It's encouraging to see the global wildlife enforcement network was greatly enhanced with the support of IQIC. Among it, China also played its part. In addition to Mekong Dragon operations, Ministry of Public Security of China, the headquarters of police, initiated in Interpol to launch the Operation Golden Strike, addressing illicit wildlife trafficking, in which we not only rule on the criminals, but also provide financial support to Interpol. China welcomes the continuation efforts by IQIC. Therefore, we support the adoption of the draft decision 19AA to 19BB of document 19.5 and delete decision 18.13. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China, and thank you for being brief. I will take 1 or 2 more interventions. I do have more parties than that asking for the floor. And I will just, what I'm hearing in this discussion is that we are supportive of the recommendations. So I will take Norway, and then I'll consider our time. But please keep your interventions to less than a minute.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the Secretariat for the submission of this document. We support the adoption of the decisions as found in Annex 1 and the deletion of Decision 18.13. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. I will take the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports the recommendations provided by the Secretariat. We are encouraged by the overwhelming support the IQIC has received and the work the Secretariat and the IQIC have already completed. The United States would like to encourage engagement of IQIC partners with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement Attachés, who engage directly with host country and regional law enforcement authorities to initiate and foster transnational investigations to combat wildlife trafficking. The U.S. Department of State also has a history of longstanding support to IQIC partners to address wildlife trafficking globally by strengthening global and regional wildlife enforcement networks and interoperability of wildlife enforcement networks, or WENs. We've provided financial assistance to the IQIC since 2010, and we have funded the convening of 4 global meetings of wildlife enforcement networks, the 4th of which will be held on the margins of this COP. Our efforts to strengthen the IQIC to coordinate and support global wildlife enforcement build on the work of a wide range of U.S. agencies in line with our whole-of-government approach to combating wildlife trafficking. The U.S. will continue to support capacity building and law enforcement efforts to end wildlife trafficking and commends the efforts of the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I have 2 more parties asking for the floor. I would like to take 1 observer. I will get the European Union and I will have Niger, and then I will take 1 observer. But please just keep your comments to the recommendations if we can, so that we can give our interpreters their lunch break. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, we support the recommendations and we appreciate the work of IQIC. In particular, we appreciate the assistance to parties in developing effective law enforcement and criminal justice systems. We think this is really important, and we hope that there will be efforts by all to secure long-term funding for the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. Niger.
Ok. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Donc, le Niger voulait ici notifier que l'Afrique de l'Ouest a mis en place une stratégie régionale de lutte contre la criminalité liée aux espèces sauvages. Cet exemple peut être partagé par les autres régions qui n'ont pas évolué dans ce processus. Et cet appui a été accordé par l'USAID à travers le programme WABIC qui a évolué en WABILED et qui a fait qu'aujourd'hui, dans l'espace ouest africain, à travers la CEDEAO, nous avons un outil robuste qui peut être partagé avec les autres sous-régions dans le cadre de la lutte contre la criminalité liée aux espèces sauvages. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Niger. As I've said, I will take one observer. So the floor is open for observers. We really do need to finish. It is exactly lunchtime. Not seeing any observers asking for the floor. Excellent. Guinea, you are asking for the floor. Do you have a very, very brief statement to make?
Oui, allô. Par rapport aux criminalités phoniques, certes, des efforts louables ont été produits, mais il faut quand même une recommandation que nous souhaiterions que la mise en œuvre à disposition des financements liés pour accompagner ces mesures de financement, par exemple le projet Parc. Également implanter le programme de renforcement des capacités pour la mise en œuvre du cadre d'indicateurs du consortium international de lutte contre la criminalité phonique. Également, ce cadre constituera certainement un outil précieux pour évaluer les efforts fournis en matière de lutte contre la criminalité phonique. Donc, nous recommandons à ce que ces mesures soient accompagnées, vraiment que l'organe même de la gestion, l'organe de la CITES intervienne par rapport à ces deux paramètres-là. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Guinea. And with that, I think we conclude that the committee recommends the Conference of the Parties adopt draft decisions 19AA to 19BB contained in Annex 1 to the present document, and to delete Decision 18.13 on the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, the IQIC, as it's been implemented. So with that, everyone, it is our lunch break. I would like you back here at 1:45. We are 3 documents behind now. I know side events are going on, but please make your best efforts to be here at 1:45. I know we have a long afternoon and a long evening, and I would like to give us the time if I can. Enjoy your lunch breaks. One quick announcement from the Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick reminder about the working group on strategic vision indicators that's taking place now during lunch break in Caribe 6. And then will be the action plan on gender-related matters will meet, that I mentioned this morning, will meet tomorrow at Caribe 6 at 12:15. And the role of CITES in reducing risk of zoonotic diseases will meet in ISTMO 1 at 12:15, also tomorrow. Please consult the daily schedule for the details relating to the working group meeting times and the rooms allocated. The daily schedule on the website. Thank you. And please remember to take your cards. Please do not forget to take your cards.